Hello, everyone. Just wanted to come with you to another installment of sharing your faith. Really, I think actually the way we should talk about it is having spiritual conversations. I think sometimes when we say the language of sharing our faith, it kind of actually causes us to look at things the wrong way. Maybe do things in a way that aren't actually the most helpful, because we start thinking about, okay, I have to memorize these four spiritual laws, or these 10 steps for following Christ, or we come up with these formulas, right, for how we're going to share our faith. And it can be intimidating, and it's also can be really kind of not great for the person on the receiving end of it, where they feel like they're just kind of being dumped on, and instead of receiving good news, which is what it should be about, is right, sharing good news. And I've talked in the previous videos a bit about how in order for it to be good news, we have to know why it's good news to that person, right? We already know that Jesus is the good news. He's the answer, but we have to know what the question is before we get to that. And so the way that we get to that is by asking great questions. And you see Jesus doing this. There's over 200 questions that he asks in the Gospels. He's always asking questions. We're naturally good at this. When we're kids, kids are naturally curious, and they ask questions. They come up and say, hey, what's wrong with your foot? Right? Hey, how come you have that cane? I get these kinds of questions because they don't have a filter, and they just ask the obvious questions. But as we get older, we stop asking obvious questions. Where it's like, well, we don't want to be impolite, so we don't ask the obvious questions that are there. But that means we don't be able to enter into the conversations that we could have. And we need to get back in the habit of asking obvious questions, asking good questions. Some people are really good at this, and it seems like, wow, they're just born conversationalists, and they're able to you sit down and they just keep asking you questions, and you spend so much time with them. You're like, wow, how did all that time pass? And it seems like nothing, because they're so interested in you. They seem naturally interested in you, and people like to talk about themselves. So it's like, okay, but I believe this is a skill that you can also develop. Yes, it's some people are better at it than others naturally, but we can all work on this skill of asking great questions. And that's really important, because if we're going to have spiritual conversations, see, what most people do is their spiritual conversation goes like this: hey, you want to come to church with me, right? We want to put off that conversation to a professional, to someone else. But really, they're a lot more likely to have that deep, heart-changing conversation with you. And it's not just about, hey, can you come to church with me, or could you come to this concert with me? It's fine to invite people to those kinds of things. But even more important is we need to be able to have spiritual conversations with people, to be able to talk about the things that are going on in their life, and be able to bring God's answers to them. And we don't even have to be, when you bring in God's answers, you don't even have to do it in the Bible says, or talk about God. You just bring biblical principles, and you don't have to know all the answers. You could just share your story. Say, hey, you mind? And we were talking about in the other videos, right? How you share your story, or share biblical stories. Hey, that reminds me of a story that I read, and make that connection to people's lives. So what are some of those kinds of questions that you could ask? And so I kind of was thinking about this and coming up with some list of questions, and looking in places or other people who've made suggestions. And some of these things, right, you have to figure out how to even work them into the conversation. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to memorize these questions and then I'm just going to come and hit people with. No, you start thinking about the types of questions that you need to be asking, and be open and watching where there's openings in conversations, where people are open, and where the Spirit is leading you to be able to have these opportunities to ask the kinds of questions. So you might ask people, what things have benefited you the most in your life's journey? And that's a thoughtful question that nobody probably hadn't been thought to be asked, even think about that. When you ask the question, people think, well, what is it that really has helped me the most? And they might want to ask you, and then you have the opportunity to share what God has done for you. Or you might say, do you ever struggle to control things? What kinds of things do you think you can't and can control in life? Which is really right? A way of approaching the fact that God is in control of everything, and our lives seem out of control if we're always, and the fear that is in people's lives because they can't control so many things. So many things are out of their control. That brings a lot of fear in people's life, and you can actually talk about the hope that you have in your life. So it's another great question that you could try and get to, or you could just tell me about what their greatest success. I say, tell me about your greatest success. What things have you looked at in your life and said, wow, that was awesome. I was a real success at that. And what made it that way? Right? Just be interested in their story. What's the biggest thing that you have gained on your journey or learned? And so you want to understand where they're coming from, understand their worldview. Just ask them, what's the greatest piece of advice that you've been given? What's the biggest piece of wisdom that's been passed to you? Or what do you enjoy about your career? Why? What do you not like about it? What is discouraging to you? What are some of your life goals? What dreams have you given up on? What dreams are you still holding on to? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of our world? Right? Those kinds of questions get people thinking about the big picture, thinking about what life is about what the future of our world is, whose hands is it in. You could ask, some people don't really think there's like a truth or a not truth. You just ask, is there room in your worldview for any absolutes? Just find out. Or how do you determine if something is true or false? Right? There's a big thing right now out there, fake news. Everyone's saying, oh, that's fake news, that's fake news. Well, how do you decide what's true and what's not? How do you determine that? What is the basis for that? And this is getting people to think foundationally about truth. And many people live their lives without even really thinking about those things. So asking those kinds of questions begins to get them to engage with truth. And of course, we know that God is truth. But if they're not even thinking about the foundational level of truth, we won't ever get there. So we've got to ask those kinds of questions. Why do you think so many people try hard to live good lives? What's that come from? Where does that desire come from? And so those, we could go on with lots of more questions, and I could maybe put a list up for somebody if you're interested. But those kind of give you some things to start with, just ways of thinking. Just begin to think about the kinds of questions that are around Christianity, around life, around purpose, and around why we're here, and find out what people think about that. Just be curious. And as you're curious about them, they're oftentimes will be curious about you, and you'll have the opportunity to share your story. And again, as we talked about in the further views, when you share your story, you do it with gentleness and respect, right? That's what the Bible tells us. Always be ready to give the answer for the hope that is in you, but do it with gentleness and respect. And so be ready to do that and practice these skills. Begin practicing them with your spouse, your kids, your friends. Just start trying to ask better questions, deeper questions. And the side benefit of that is you'll actually get to know the people around you better. Sometimes we can go through life and not really ask the deeper questions of the people that we see every day, and so we stay more at a superficial level. And if we take the time to just ask the harder questions, ask the deeper questions, the questions that take some thought to answer, and we can practice those with those people, and we'll get to know them better, and we'll have that skill developing to be able, when the Spirit gives us opportunity, puts someone in front of us, that we can have that conversation, we can ask those questions. Have a great day, and until next time.